Good. Okay, great. Just now, let me get the share screen. All right. Okay. There we go.
All right.
A little bigger. Make it a little bigger. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so because I have Bert doing the screen sharing and I've minimized that on my screen, I can actually see you guys. So if you want to talk, you can either chime in, raise your hand, whatever. Don't use the chat because I'm not good at looking at the chat. I'd rather look at people. But I want this to be interactive rather than a lecture. So I'm hoping you will have questions and comments and feel to chime in at any point where something comes up. You don't have to wait for like the end of a section. So starting with the all women group, the starting point is the Mishnah in Brachot. This is the 7th chapter of the first 2 Mishnayot. And it says 3 people who ate together are required to form a Zimmun, to say Birkat HaMazon. And the language is Shlosha she'achlu kiyachad chayavin lizamein. And the word Zimmun comes from the same root as the Hebrew word that means to invite. You're inviting people to join together to basically thank God for your meal. And then the second Mishnah says, women, children, and slaves, one does not include them in the Zimmun. And we're going to hear a lot of commentary about what that means. So then in source 2, we move to the Talmud in Arachin, and they're not even talking about Birkat HaMazon or Zimmun. What they have is a whole long list of things, and they're talking about when the Mishnah or a Braita starts by saying Hakol, everybody does such and such. That the purpose of the Hakol is to include some group of people that you might have not thought were included. And so the Gemara says, Hakol chayavin b'zimun la'atuye mai. When the Braita says everyone is included in Zimmun, who is that meant to include? And they go on to answer, to include women and slaves. As it is taught, women form a Zimmun for themselves and slaves form a Zimmun for themselves. And then you have a similar formulation of the same concept in the Talmud in Brachot. And here they say, this is source 3, women form a Zimmun for themselves and slaves form a Zimmun for themselves. Women, slaves, and minors, if they wish to form a Zimmun, they do not form a Zimmun. So based on those sources, the Rosh, who is a fairly prominent Rishon, concludes that a group of 3 or more women eating together are required to form a Zimmun. And his language is a source 4. It seems to me that the passage in Arachin must be read as obligating, for it includes them, meaning women, as it is taught all are obligated. Furthermore, since women are obligated in Birkat HaMazon, neither on a Torah level or rabbinically, why shouldn't they be obligated in Zimmun like men? And so if we stopped here, we'd come to the conclusion that...
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Could you go, what is Arachin? That's a certain commentary?
No, it is a tractate in the Gemara that deals with really bizarre stuff. It's a form of donation to the temple, but it's based on sort of the value of the person's life. And the Torah has a whole provision about how you figure these values, and it's a fixed amount based on age and gender. So there's a little table basically in the Torah. If you're a 20-year-old man, your erech is X. If you're a 20-year-old woman, your erech is Y. If you're a 60-year-old man, your erech is Z. And the Gemara is basically looking at those psukim in the Torah and elaborating on how you do all that stuff. And of course, as the Gemara always does, it meanders into a whole bunch of other stuff, which I don't recall offhand what they are. But it's a whole
What does it say
practice.
about this? So from there, it's saying
Yeah.
that women are obligated?
Yeah,
Okay.
they're basically saying somewhere there's a Breita, and I didn't track down where that Breita comes from, that says everyone is obligated in Zimmun. And the question is, what does it mean, everybody? And they answer, whenever you have that kind of formulation. And what there is in the Gemara there's a list of, I don't know, 5 or 6 different statements. Some are in the Mishnah, some are in a Breita, that start all whatevers are obligated in something or other. And in each case, the Gemara asks, when it says kol, all, why is that word kol there? Who is it meaning to include in that statement? And in each case, it includes some group that you might not have thought would have been included. The rest of them have nothing to do with Birkat Hamazon or Zimmun. I don't really remember what they are. I think I don't want to speculate, but
And the second question is, Zimmun is Rabbanit Varech?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions or comments so far? Okay. So basically, if we stopped here, we would think that there's no issue. You got 3 women, they should, say Rabbanit Varech. They should do a Zimmun. Yet by the time of the Rishonim, the practice had been that women didn't do it. And you see this in a couple of other places too, where, and it's not clear whether the language in the Gemara that says women are supposed to do it meant that they were actually doing it, or this was just aspirational or theoretical or whatever. But comes Tosfot and they look around and they say, wait a minute, my mother doesn't do it, my grandmother doesn't do it, these are from women. How can it be that there's an obligation to do a Zimmun and all these from women are not doing it? And so we get in source 5, Tosfot is commenting on the language that says, from here we learn that women can form their own Zimmun. And it is difficult to explain, why isn't this the practice? Since it is taught in the Breita, women form a Zimmun, it sounds as though they are required to form a Zimmun. One can answer that the language, women form a Zimmun for themselves, means if they want to form a Zimmun, they form a Zimmun. And we can learn this a little from the language that is taught next to it. Women slaves and minors, if they wish to form a Zimmun, they cannot. And that language we saw in source 3, that was the language in Brachot. And that which was said at the beginning of Arachin, which we have as source 2, all are obligated in Zimmun, includes women, is said as a voluntary matter, a reshut, not as an obligatory matter, not as a chovah. So we've now muddied the waters in terms of obligation or just permission. And then, in an attempt to harmonize the position of Tosfot with language that seems to say women are obligated in Zimmun. The Smog in 13th century France quotes the Re, one of the major Tosophists, and this is source 6. And Re says that specifically for themselves, meaning an all-women group, it is voluntary. But when they eat with men, they, meaning the women, are obligated and discharge their obligation with our, meaning men's, Zimmun. So his sort of attempt to harmonize is to say, if there are 3 men who are forming a Zimmun, the women who are at the table are obligated to participate in that Zimmun, to respond to the leader. But if it's just all women, that's where it's optional. And it doesn't seem to be a consistent with the earlier sources, but it is consistent, with the Tosophist view. And the Shulchan Aruch takes the same approach as the Smog. This is source 7. Women form a Zimmun for themselves as a voluntary matter, a reshut. But when they eat with men, they are obligated and discharge their obligation with our, meaning men's, Zimmun. And that's pretty much the contemporary mainstream view. And in fact,
Gloria,
yeah, sure.
have you ever seen? I've never been at a table where women do the Zimmun.
At Maharat, every communal meal has women leading Zimmun.
At least,
And I've seen it, for example, at the Jofa conferences. Again, have there been, I've seen it in individual, small groups of women also, but I think it's still more, women who go out of their way to identify as feminists will make a point of doing it. Whereas I think probably the mainstream practice is that most women don't do it still.
Gloria, as a practical matter, there are not many, this is an answer to your question, and is I think that practically speaking, there are very few instances in which there are 3 or more women eating alone without men being there. And once you have 3 men, then in that case, they form the Zimun. So, if you do a family meal and you have 3 men and you have, 3 women, or more women, you just the men do it, and the women are yotze.
But there are family groups where you might have 3 adult women and, maybe 2 men because the rest of the family are kids.
Right.
I mean, it's possible, but you're right. It's probably not that common.
But from here, you're saying we learn that we're not obligated, but we can do it. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Okay, sorry. Somehow I muted myself. I don't know how. When we get to source 8, what we see is the Mishnah Brura. So he's like the early 1900s. He's trying to explain why it is that women are, have been held to be not obligated. And he says, one can say that the reason the sages did not wish to impose on women the obligation of Birkat Hazimun when they are on their own is because it is not so common for them to be proficient in Birkat Hazimun. So basically what you've got is early language in the Mishnah and the Gemara, and a prominent Rishon who seemed to take the position that no, 3 women are obligated if there aren't 3 men also at the table. a practice of women not doing it, which gets codified as, well, that means that they're obviously not obligated because they're not doing it. And the Mishnah Brura now says, but the reason is because they don't know how to do it. And so, as a feminist, I look at this and I say, wait a minute. If the reason that women are not obligated is because they're too ignorant to know how to do it, and that's
Yeah.
why they haven't done it forever, maybe it's time to say, now we all have benchers. Most of us can read either the Hebrew or transliterated English. Maybe it's time to come back into making this part of a normal practice where the place is.
But
And
if
what-
you're but Gloria, if you're in a religious like a Chabad or Hasidisha, there is no way that you're going to be able to say Zimmun. Even if you're Maharat, you're not going to be able to do it.
It could be. It could be that the culture is such. In fact, a bunch of years, like 10 or 15 years ago, I was taking a class at Drisha, and we were talking about women in Zimmun, and one of the girls who had just come back from her year in Israel said that the Rabbanit at her school had basically said, not that Zimmun is optional for women, but that it's actually usher for women because now it's feminist. And therefore, the motivation for the women who want to do it is so wrong that they said women should not be doing it at all. And this girl was like flabbergasted to learn that it's exactly the opposite. That even the most conservative views are that it's permissive and the only issue really is obligation or not. But what was interesting to me is, so you've got the Mishnah Brura explaining why they're not obligated, but the guy who wrote the Mishnah Brura wrote a commentary on the Mishnah Brura called the Bir Halacha, and that's your source 9 here. And he kind of brings back the earlier view of the obligation. And so he says, women form a Zimmun for themselves as a voluntary matter, Rishut. That's a quote, I believe, from either the Shulchan Aruch or the Mishnah Brura. The opinion of the Vilna Gaon is that the essential principle is that stated by the Rosh and the students of Rabbeinu Yonah, that women making a Zimmun for themselves is an obligation, a chol. Alas, the world does not practice this. So you've even got it from the Mishnah Brura kind of conceding that, yeah, that really is, the view from a bunch of biggies, and he even includes the Vilna Gaon in there. But alas, the world does not practice that. So,
Gloria.
Yeah.
Yeah, what year was this said that the world doesn't practice it? So like a number of years ago.
I'm thinking the Bir Halacha was about the same time as the Mishnah Brura, so it's like the first decade of the 1900s, maybe.
Oh, okay, thanks.
But from what Teddy is saying, it's probably still true today in a lot of circles.
Mm-hmm. That wouldn't have anything to do with the women don't do it because they ain't man grandma. They don't have the time. It's just that.
No, this is not a time thing.
No,
You
just
eat
in general.
what you eat, and this is tied to eating. It's not tied to any particular time.
You could eat at any time, right? You could eat at any time. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, comments, or should we go on to the next piece?
Should go on.
All right. So the next piece is 3 women and either 1 or 2 men. And we start with, in source 10, Rav Moshe Sternbach, who is a contemporary Haredi posek in Israel. And my voice is going, so can I get a volunteer to read this, source 10?
I could read it.
Go ahead, please.
It seems, in my humble opinion, to be inclined to think that despite the opinion of the Vilna Gaon that women recite Zimmun for themselves is an obligation, that is when they are by themselves, meaning there are no men with them. But when they are with men, the women are not obligated in Zimmun. Okay, this is from Rav Moshe Sternbach. Okay.
Yeah.
He's a contemporary Haredi. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. The
So,
women.
so he's basically saying, even if there's 3 women at the table, if there's even 1 man, that obligation that women might have to say Zimmun doesn't exist anymore.
But the obligation of Zimmun falls on all those who are eating as one unit. But when they are together with men, which requires modesty, that's what I was going to say before. You're not supposed to be singing in front of men. So that's another reason why you wouldn't be saying it in front of men. But anyway.
Well, I'm not sure that the Zimmun would count as singing. It's barely chanting.
Okay. Which requires let's see what it says here, which requires modesty, since they are not considered as if all of them have eaten as one, they are no longer obligated in Zimmun. And even where there are 3 women alone and no need to include the men present, in any case, the sages did not make a distinction that the women should be obligated and the men exempt. And I was asked if they women want to be stringent and to recite Zimmun in order to avoid any doubt, are they acting? You have to move it up. Are they acting properly? In my humble opinion, there are several reasons to be concerned about this. 1, lest there be in this a suspicion of yuhara, spiritual haughtiness, and furthermore, that 3 are called many, and if so, perhaps this has an aspect of lo tidgodedu, the prohibition of forming factions. When a few adopt a stringency against the custom of the city, and furthermore, in my humble opinion, one should be concerned here about the prohibition of bracha levatala. I think this is a lot here, so we have to.
There's a lot there. My sense is that he's coming up with, I don't know, excuses might be too strong a word, but that what's motivating him is that somehow it doesn't feel right. Whether it's a modesty thing, whether it's, wait a minute, you can't say that there's really one single eating group because men and women can't ever form a joint group, which is kind of bizarre because they do when it's 3 men and a bunch of women. This idea that, women are acting spiritually haughty because they're doing something that maybe they're not obligated to do. And the same idea of bracha levatala, which is very hard. I mean, it's hard to see how you get a bracha levatala here if in fact they have an obligation, but he raises the specter of that in order to say, no, there's no obligation. It's sort of a, cat and mouse kind of thing, you chicken and egg kind of thing. So I think all of them are, he's struggling to find reasons to say it shouldn't work because he just feels it isn't right.
I think it's like they're uncomfortable with it. They're uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think this is very much I'm uncomfortable. And the idea that, hey, there are 3 women who are doing something ritual when there's a man at the table, it's like demeaning to the man, I think is part of the sense I'm getting from his comment. But I think he's the minority view here. And you get Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. This is in source 11. This is quoted by his nephew, Rav David Auerbach. And he says, 3 women who ate together with 1 or 2 men, it is proper for one of them, meaning the women, to recite Birkat HaZimmun, and not the man. But certainly the man is permitted to respond after them. And in the footnote, he says, and thus I heard from my uncle, Rav Shlomo Zalman. So you've got another Haredi, but not super Haredi, posek, who's saying, yes, it's fine. And then you've got a similar view by Rabbi Yehuda Henkin, who, I guess we're moving more and more to the left within the Haredi world. Rav Henkin is probably, he has a foot in both camps, and he's very contemporary. He died in 2020. And just to give you some perspective, his wife is Rabbanit Chana Henkin, who founded Nishmat and founded the Yoetzet Halacha program. And he was fully behind that program, was the major supporter of it, and was probably the reason that it was accepted as widely and as quickly as it was. So he's kind of known as a feminist, but he's also known as a very centrist person. And he's very careful to not go too far, even though one suspects that, his basic approach would be to maximize feminist desires, but he's always very careful how far to go to not lose acceptance by the more right-wing community. And he's written several books on feminist topics, which is, interesting to me. And so what he says, and this is source 12, this is from a book he wrote in 2003 called Response on Contemporary Jewish Women's Issues. And he says, I occasionally encounter someone who thinks that men must leave the room when women recite their own Zimmun. I have never seen any source for this. Nor did other Rishonim prohibit a man from listening to women's Zimmun. Ritva in Hilchot Brachot explicitly permitted him to listen. And he quotes, a woman recites the blessing, meaning Birkat HaMazon, for a man through the Zimmun. And then this next bracket is me summarizing what he takes a long time to say, where he talks about Ritva and Ravad, who say that a woman who ate with 3 men can lead Zimmun, that shouldn't say 3, that should say 2 men, can lead Zimmun for them, but that instead we follow the ruling of Rambam and Tur that women cannot discharge the obligation of men for either Birkat HaMazon or Zimmun. So he's quoting Ritva and Ravad here. And then he says, most authorities view Zimmun as a rabbinical law, contrary to Ravad's opinion cited in the Tur. It is accepted halacha that women's Zimmun is optional. He cites to the Shulchan Aruch. Consequently, men are not required to respond to their Zimmun. And indeed, it would be strange for men to be ritually dependent on women. That's that sense also of maybe it's demeaning to have men ritually responsive to something that women are doing. But if men wish to respond, what grounds are there to forbid it? To summarize, when 3 or more women have dined with 1 or 2 men, one of the women may lead Zimmun and the men may listen and respond. And so I view that as, again, a fairly persuasive halachic position. And again, my sense is, well, first of all, that's going to be rare also, right? Probably it comes up in a family setting more than anything else. It's
No,
rare.
Gloria, a lot
Yeah.
of times I'll have people over my house for Shabbos dinner,
Uh-huh.
and there are 4 women and 2 men, so this is an opportunity for me to begin this.
Absolutely.
So it's not unusual, that there are more women than 2 men.
Okay. If that's your,
Mostly in
situation,
Riverdale,
then
yeah.
and you've got, poskim with heavy chops here that you can rely on.
Yeah.
So go for it. Okay, the last one, which is really the hard one, is the mixed Zimmun, where the 3 people include both men and women. And the starting point is the Mishnah that we started with in Brachot, women, children, and slaves. One does not include them in the Zimmun, presumably with men. And then in source 14, we've got Rashi giving one of the earliest reasons for why they don't combine. And this is Rashi's comment on Arachin, which was one of the earlier sources that we looked at. And he says, 3 women and similarly 3 slaves can form a zimun for themselves, but 2 women or 2 slaves cannot join with 2 men, since men are included in something that women and slaves are not. Women do not say the paragraph regarding Brit Milah, and slaves do not say the paragraph regarding inheritance of the land.
What's that?
Okay, so if you pull up Birkat Hamazon real quick, and okay, so the first bracha, we're not talking about the Zimmun itself, we're talking about the actual Birkat Hamazon. The first one is thanking God for the food, right? You gave us all this food.
Hazon is a call.
Hazon is hakol. The next one, no deh, is about the land. Because you gave us this wonderful land, right? And it says, and the covenant that you made with our flesh. And it goes on the Torah and other stuff. But because it's got both the land and the bris milah in the paragraph, the practice initially was that women did not say that paragraph and slaves did not say that paragraph. And Rashi's assumption, remember, this is at a time when text was not readily available, that things were still manuscript form, and very few people either knew everything by heart or had an actual scroll that they could be reading from. And so the assumption is that the person leading the Zimmun is also discharging the obligation of everybody at the table for Birkat Hamazon. That the typical practice was the Zimmun leader would not only lead the Zimmun, but would be the one reciting Birkat Hamazon, and everybody else would just say Amen at the end of each paragraph. So Rashi's problem with including women in the Zimmun is Well, if one of the paragraphs they don't even say, how can they be yotzei the men who are obligated to say it?
But we still
So
read
it can,
But
right,
Gloria,
contemporary, that's what I was going to say, the same thing. Don't women read it, when they do Birchat HaMazon now?
In
Yeah, that's
contemporary
what I thought.
times, women say it. I believe there's even a Mishnah Brura that says today women say it. And so
Even though it's not,
Rashi's
even
argument sort of goes away because it's just not factually true anymore. Now there's a
even though
little
the word,
bit,
Gloria, even though the words are Brisko Shechasamta B'Sarenu, is not applicable to a woman.
well, it depends on whether you view it as talking about an individual or talking about the nation. It is in the plural, and there's no reason that a woman couldn't be thinking about her husband, her sons. It's a national obligation to have bris milah. And in fact, if the father is absent, the mother is allowed to present the son for the mohel to do the bris milah. So it's an obligation sort of on the entire community of Israel. I don't think you have to see it as a personal obligation. I don't know enough about the history to know why the practice developed that women didn't say it, but that is no longer the practice. There's still an issue about, well, are they obligated to say it, or is this just a reshut? And does that make a difference? And in fact, there's a whole machloket, I think you'll get to it later, as to whether women's obligation in Birkat Hamazon in general, everybody agrees they have one, but there's a machloket as to whether it's biblical or rabbinic. So there's sort of an argument maybe still that if women's obligation is only rabbinic and men's obligation clearly is biblical, can a woman, satisfy the obligation for the men? The answer to that, I think, again, is a change in our practice. The person who leads Zimmun no longer says Birkat Hamazon for everybody else. Everybody has their own bencher and says it for
by
themselves.
himself, right?
And so you no longer have this concern about the woman, can she satisfy the men's obligation? Because she's not. The man is satisfying his own obligation by saying his own Birkat Hamazon. So these earlier kinds of concerns have factually disappeared. Okay.
And Gloria, I have something to say. Yeah, I was going to just say that sometimes you don't have to eat the whole meal to be part of a Zimmun. In other words, let's say you came just for dessert. If you want to, you could be part of a Zimmun.
Right.
That's what I
We're
heard.
gonna get to that in the very next source.
Oh, okay.
Okay. There was this Rishon who has admittedly a minority position that he held that women can join with men to make a Zimmun. And we don't have his exact language anyplace, but what we have is the responsa of the Maharam of Rottenburg, who give, and this guy, this Rishon who took that position was Rav Yehuda HaKohen. The Maharam summarizes his arguments and then rebuts them. And so by looking at the response of the Maharam, we can get an idea of what Rav Yehuda HaKohen was thinking. And again, it's out there. If you're grasping for straws, you can point to it. We generally don't point, we don't follow a minority opinion unless there's a great sorech, a great need. And I'm not sure that we're at the point where we can, say there's a great need here. But anyway, his position is interesting. And this is, again, the language of the Maharal. Rav Yehuda HaKohen said that a woman can combine with men to create a Zimmun of 3 for Birkat HaMazon. And he brought a proof from a Kal V'chomer. Just as a man who ate only vegetables can join in a Zimmun, even though if he ate alone, he would be exempt from Birkat HaMazon. All the more so should a woman who ate bread be permitted to join the Zimmun, since she is at least rabbinically obligated in Birkat HaMazon. So the argument is the guy who just ate vegetables doesn't even have an obligation to say Birkat HaMazon at that point from just the vegetables, yet we let him in the Zimmun. So why shouldn't we let a woman in the Zimmun if she's actually eaten bread, and eating bread is sort of the defining character of the Zimmun? Lance, are you trying to ask a question?
Yes, I have a question. First of all, let me say that I'm fascinated by the complexities here. And you've certainly done your homework and your research, and I'm very impressed with that. My question would be, what is a story with a tum-tum?
I have no idea. I am sure it is addressed somewhere, but I don't know what they say.
Would you regard a tum-tum today as a trans woman and a trans man?
Whoa, that's way beyond my pay grade.
Okay. Sorry.
There probably are people who have written about it and talked about it. And you can probably find some of that by a good Google search, but not anything that I am conversant with.
My understanding is, Gloria, that there's at least one Haredi rabbi who recognizes LGBTQ. So a Haredi rabbi, but at this moment, I couldn't.
Okay,
I read the article a long time
I know
ago.
that
But
there is I don't know about that. I know there is a Haredi rabbi who has written a whole book of halacha for trans people.
Interesting.
You
wouldn't happen to have that
ago.
book, would you?
I do not have that book. A lot of it is very practical. You know, which side of the mechitza do you sit on? Can you be called for an aliyah?
Yeah, these are all major problems, right?
Well, they're major questions that need to be resolved. And obviously they were important enough in the community where this Haredi rabbi was, that he felt the need to actually address them in a sefer. So
Gloria, what would
there's
you
hope
do?
there.
Well, Gloria, what would you do if you were dining with in the HR community with a trans man? I mean, you would have to have a ruling, right?
I would have to find out what the halacha is. I don't know off the top of my head. I am sure that there are people who have looked into that and have opinions on that, but I don't.
Okay, well, Gloria, if you do find some research on that, could you please share it with us?
Okay. If I find, but right now I am totally overcommitted. I am not undertaking.
Well, I understand. I'm not
research.
trying to put pressure on you, Gloria. It's just a subject that it seems to me is ongoing in the future and has relevance to us right now.
I would suggest, if you're interested, a Google search would be a good starter.
Okay. And what should I search for specifically?
Transgender and halacha.
Also,
That sounds
Lance, you
good.
could also
Gender?
ask your own rabbi. You could ask your rabbi.
My rabbi?
Yeah.
Oh, the one who submitted the questions and answers to the group? Rabbi Sachs?
Yeah, see if he has any information on it.
Yeah, it sounds like an interesting idea. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate the help.
Maybe,
Yeah.
Okay, let's
so,
start.
you know, if the group would find it interesting, maybe I'll ask Ref Stephen, you know, who might be dealing with this in a practical matter in a practical way, to talk about, you know, how he views the halacha on this.
How about Rabbi Fox?
Could be Rabbi Fox. I don't know. I'll see. I'll see.
Okay.
Rabbi Fox, you know, was told me he wanted to do something about mourning, MOURNIG, because he's in the midst of doing some research on that. And this way it could be a twofer, he's doing it for whatever he's doing it for and for our group, because I don't want to make more work for him. But maybe we could ask, because I think Rav Stephen, probably has to deal with this. There probably are I know there are transgender people, and at the Bayit. And so, how where they sit and other things like that is a practical matter that he's probably had to rule on.
Right. Well,
I
I
would
just
think what
suggested
you
Rabbi Bert, one quick thing. I just suggested Rabbi Fox because I know how highly you regard him.
Oh no, he's wonderful, but as I say,
he's done a lot on lesbians, but I don't know how much he's done on transgender people.
yeah, but as I
Um,
said, I'm convinced, I'm almost certain that as a practical matter, Rav Stephen, maybe he's consulted with Rabbi Linzer or whatever, but I am certain, because there are transgender people in the community, I'm sure that he has had to deal with giving them a liot and where they should sit. I'm absolutely certain of that. So maybe he's the guy, because he's had to deal with it, because he couldn't escape dealing with it.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
okay, we're getting really close to 11. I'm wondering if there's clearly more stuff to do than we can do in the next 5 minutes. So maybe we should break here and resume next week.
Sounds like a good idea.
Sounds like a good
So-
idea.
Have a good day.
Yeah, have a good day. Take care. Have a safe drive.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank
Everybody
you.
take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
Bye.